Could we be about to see Operation Just Cause Part 2? We're going to talk about it on today's Hot Zone.
This is the Hot Zone. Engaging with the news in a whole new way, international war correspondent Chuck Holton brings insight into areas of crisis and lets you help those affected.
Hey folks, Chuck Holton here. Thanks for watching the Hot Zone. Do you remember that time when the United States sent their military down to Latin America to take out a Latin American dictator who was like dealing drugs and things like that? And we took down their country militarily. Yeah, I remember that. That was called Operation Just Cause in 1989 when we jumped into Panama here. But that may be actually about to happen again. I mean, probably not. We'll see. The United States has sent the military, specifically a bunch of ships from the U.S. Navy, down into the Caribbean, into Central America, in order to try to stop the Venezuelan government from shipping massive tons of drugs into the United States. As it turns out, Venezuela being one of our enemies, they know they can't beat us militarily, but they've been doing everything they can to undermine our country and make some money in the process. So listen to William Barr talk a little bit about that right now.
There's an area right on the border in Colombia, Norte de Santander, which is one of the primary cocaine-producing areas remaining in Colombia. The FARC gets this cocaine over into Venezuela and then is given safe haven by the regime to fly this cocaine from an area called Zulia near Lake Maracaibo up into Central America. We estimate that somewhere between 200 and 250 metric tons of cocaine are shipped out of Venezuela by these routes.
Today, we announced criminal charges against Nicolas Maduro for running, together with his top lieutenants, a narco-terrorism partnership with the FARC for the past 20 years. The scope and magnitude of the drug trafficking alleged was made possible only because Maduro and others corrupted the institutions of Venezuela and provided political and military protection for the rampant narco-terrorism crimes described in the charges. As alleged, Maduro and the other defendants expressly intended to flood the United States with cocaine in order to undermine the health and well-being of our nation. Maduro very deliberately deployed cocaine as a weapon.
Maduro and his other defendants have betrayed the Venezuelan people and corrupted Venezuela's institutions. While the Venezuelan people suffer, this cabal lines their pockets with drug money and the proceeds of their corruption. And this has to come to an end.
Okay, so did you catch where he said 250 tons of drugs? That's annually. So I ran the numbers on that. That's about $15 billion worth of cocaine. And $15 billion right now amounts to 15 to 20% of Venezuela's gross domestic product. That's a pretty big chunk of change for Venezuela. But it's also a big hit for the United States. Now, I think you could make a pretty good case that that would be a really good reason why we would want to secure our southern borders. And you've heard it said for years now, since Donald Trump started talking about securing the U.S. southern borders, that it was impossible. You couldn't do it. That there's no reason we should even be trying to build a wall or stop the migration because it's just not possible. Well, guess what? Have you heard anything about irregular migration since this COVID-19 thing started? Yeah, me neither. I heard that there was a new caravan leaving Honduras right about the time that the whole COVID thing started blowing up in Europe, and Donald Trump, if you remember, declared that we weren't going to accept any more flights from Europe. Well, guess what? Guatemala allowed those people to come into Guatemala, but they weren't allowed to leave Guatemala as far as I can tell. As far as I know, those people are still in limbo in Guatemala. That's not to say that there's not still a pipeline of immigrants, irregular migrants coming north or that would like to come north. But right now, everything is locked down and everybody is stuck. And so all those people who said it wasn't possible, yeah, well, now we're seeing that it kind of is. Our southern border is shut. It is closed down. So take a look at, he's a philosopher, a Canadian guy named Stéphane Molyneux. And I don't agree with everything that he has to say, but he does make a lot of sense in what he has to say right here. Listen to this.
Ah, you see, my friends, now the walls are going up. Now the borders are secure. Now the massive swirl and tsunami of human migration across the globe that has characterized the post-Second World War period has come to a grinding, sudden, savage stop. Now the borders that most of us have been desperate to talk about for the last couple of decades have suddenly been enforced, despite the fact that we were always told how impossible it was to stop the massive flow of human movement, but it can be stopped like that. Now those of us who've been concerned with steadily rising real estate prices driven by mass migration, with steadily declining school quality, with the interruption of the transmission of values from one generation to the next, because in a multi-ethnic, multi-religious society, in a state school, in a government school, you cannot teach fundamental moral values because it's going to offend someone. Those of us who've been concerned about environmental depredation due to mass migration, those of us who've been concerned over wages being driven down due to mass migration, suddenly we're in an odd way being listened to. Now, you see, when mass migration benefited the elites by giving free votes to the left and cheap labor to the right, it was something that we just couldn't stop. But you see now that what is crossing the borders is not easy Democrat voters or easy Republican workers, but rather instead a virus that can infect the elites. Boom! The borders go up, you see. And I hope that helps you see your place in the hierarchy, my friends. Decades of your concerns, the mass rape of girls in England, the mass destruction of social trust, the mass driving down of wages, that didn't mean anything. But the moment that the elites could get sick, the borders go up, you see. And now I hope you see your place in the state. Because until you see your actual place in the plans of the elites, you will be utterly unable to change it.
Okay, I don't know if his foreboding tone is really, I mean, obviously that's his opinion. And the fact that, you know, you're at the bottom rung of the ladder, well, you kind of already knew that, didn't you? But it is possible for us to vote to do something about our southern border. And he's right about the fact that right now that southern border is closed. Now, if you haven't seen the latest numbers, the Trump administration, despite massive pushback, massive just conflict and being fought every step of the way, they have managed to build about 400 miles of border fence, of the new border fence. That's that 30-foot tall bollard-style border fence that we've reported on a lot on this show. They've managed to build about 400 miles of that now, and it looks like by the end of November that they could have maybe half of what they actually would need to build to actually secure the southern border. Now, that is a feat. It's a marvel, not because it was so hard for us to build it. As a nation, we have the resources to build a fence along our southern border. What makes it a marvel is that he was able to do it against so much pushback, against so much opposition from the left. Now, when your friends come to you and they say, look, there's no sense building a wall because it obviously don't work. Walls don't work. It's not going to keep people out. We've seen examples of people cutting down this new fence or jumping over the new fence, and they're right, we have. Here's the answer to that question. That wall is not intended to stop every single person from coming across. I mean, that'd be nice, but we know that's not going to be the case. There will always be people who will find a way to get in. However, there are hundreds of miles on the U.S. southern border of just wide open desert where there's literally nothing but a barbed wire fence. And I've reported on that many times. So putting a fence up there will not only make it much more difficult for human beings to get across, but it'll make it all but impossible for truckloads of drugs to come driving across, which is exactly what's been happening for years. And those drugs undermine our economy, they undermine our culture, and they undermine our country, our national security, far more than the people who are crossing the border. So if we can put up a massive wall on that border that will all but stop the vast majority of the people, but it will stop almost every single convoy of trucks full of dope coming across. Now, are they going to find ways to get dope across? Of course they will. It's very profitable for them, but it's going to be a lot harder. This has always been a cat and mouse game. But that doesn't mean, but just the fact that it's a cat and mouse game, that the enemy is going to try to find ways around your measures, doesn't mean you shouldn't take measures. It doesn't mean you should throw the gates open. We want to stop that flow of just toxic trash that comes into the United States across our southern border. And I'm not talking about the people, I'm talking about the narcotics. And a wall is a really good way to do that. Now, if you want to know if a wall is worth having, ask the people whose job it is to stop the people from coming across illegally. And you won't find a Border Patrol agent. You won't find a policeman along the border, a sheriff along the border. You won't find a person in those professions that will tell you, yeah, we don't need a wall. Walls don't work. Those people say walls work. If you look in the San Diego sector, for example, when they put up not even the current barriers that they're putting in, but the wall before that was a double layer fence, they saw a 500% decrease in crossings of illegal migrants there. Now, there were still people who crossed, that got across. Almost on a daily basis, there were people that got across. But that's not happening now that we have a 30-foot barrier in place. We have made it far, far more difficult, and it's worth every penny, because that barrier, as I've said many times, number one, it will stand the test of time. Nobody's ever going to, no future president is going to go along and bulldoze that fence. They're not going to knock that thing down. It's going to stay there for 100 years. And so it will keep working whether or not we have a Republican president or a Democratic president. It's going to keep working. Number two, it gives the impression to the people who would come across for all the free benefits they can get in the United States that it's just not worth it, that we are serious about closing our southern border. And what we have seen since the Trump administration took office is that every time the people in the southern hemisphere, actually anywhere in the world, get the idea that they can easily make it into the United States, that the gates are open, that the U.S. is open for business, every time that message gets out, we see a flood of humanity across our southern border. But every time that the message gets out that we are taking that security seriously, don't bother coming, the border is closed, you're not going to get across, you'll get stuck in Mexico, what we see is a dramatic reduction in the number of illegal crossers. And we want to have we need these people. We need people in our country to come in and work. We need people to come in and do the things that Americans don't want to do, of course. But those people need to come in legally. And there's a huge line of people trying to get here legally. And it's just not right. It's just not fair to allow these people to come in and make their very first act in the United States an act of crime, an act of violence against the nation that they claim to want to be a part of. And that's my opinion. I'll be back again on Monday. We'll see you then. Take care.
The Hot Zone is produced by Amy Holton and Livefire Media. Copyright 2019.